Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you are a repeat listener, welcome back. So if you don't know already, The Truth Tank shop has moved from Etsy over to Spring. You can still find all the same designs as on the Etsy store, plus a couple of new ones. You can find the link in the show notes or over on Instagram or Facebook. This episode is going to be a little shorter than the previous 5 or 6. It's not going to be 3 or even 2+ hours. I've only got a 14-page script for this one. So in tonight's episode, we are going to be having a look at the latest assassination attempt on Donald Trump. I think this is the third attempt to assassinate Donald Trump. I hope you packed your tinfoil hat for this episode because you are going to need it, because I'm going deep into the conspiracy rabbit hole. I have a lot of opinions about this event, this assassination attempt, whatever you want to call it. A lot of things, in my own opinion, don't add up. I'm not buying what the media is saying about it, which is why I felt I had to cover it in detail. Before I start to ramble, let's get straight into tonight's episode. This is episode 99 of The Truth Tank, one more episode to 100. I decided not to have a 100th episode celebration. I think that's a little lame and self-aggrandizing, and besides, no one would have sent anything anyway. But I decided to cover a topic that was a little sensitive politically in Australia at the moment, and will probably divide a lot of people. So as I was saying, this is episode 99 of The Truth Tank, the Trump assassination attempt, the White House Correspondents Dinner. On the 26th of September, I remember turning the TV on in the morning to see the breakfast news and hearing that some type of commotion happened at the Correspondents' Dinner involving the president, the vice president, and his cabinet, whatever they call them. But at the time, not a lot of details were released. There wasn't really a clear picture of what had happened. The clip I saw, Trump was whisked away by the Secret Service out the back. The cops went on stage and people were evacuated. Now, in that clip, you hear what sounds like someone dropping a plate or a tray of something. You hear a couple of bangs, but that's about it. But as the day went on, more details surfaced, and it became apparent that it was another assassination attempt on the president. He's a pretty popular fellow. This is, I think, the third assassination attempt while he was president. He's had a couple of others before he was president and leading up to the presidency, I'm pretty sure. And that's why I wanted to cover this in podcast form. I wanted to dive into the details of what happened. So, what actually happened? April 25, 2026, Washington, D.C., inside the Washington Hilton. Roughly 2,600 people are inside the ballroom for the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's made up of journalists, cabinet officials, political figures, celebrities. At the time this took place, on stage was the entertainment. Donald Trump was seated at the head of the table, as you'd expect. And it looked like there was some type of comedy routine or something going on. There was someone reading cue cards or something like that from what I saw. It wasn't really explained who he was. He did look like a comedian of some type or, some type of entertainment. The White House Correspondents' Dinner happens every year. It's always held in the same location inside the Washington Hilton. It's a very large space. The Secret Service know it very well. It's more or less part of the security routine. The Correspondents' Dinner, as I just mentioned, has been there for a long time, so the Secret Service know the building inside and out, which I guess is an advantage if you are running a pretty large security operation and you're trying to cover an area that size. From what I have read, the hall where it's held is pretty big. It holds, I think, like 3,000 or 4,000 people or something like that. And I think it's pretty safe to assume that the White House Correspondents' Dinner, this ballroom in particular, is probably the most heavily guarded place in the city. It should have been nearly impossible for anyone to get past the first layer of security, let alone all of them. So how did things end up like they did? Security on paper is heavy. The United States Secret Service is responsible for protecting Trump, but they also had local police as well as event security to cover the outer layers. So it wasn't just the Secret Service involved. This was a multi-layered security operation headed by the Secret Service, backed up by the police, and further backed up through event security. However, because there's always a however in these types of cases, the building itself remains partially open, because after all, it is still a functioning hotel and you can't just lock the hotel down and kick everybody out just because the president's in town. That wouldn't be very nice, and if I paid for a room, even a basic one or a suite, and you're told you can't go into it for a couple of hours until the president's vacated the area, I'd be pretty fucking pissed, and I would want some type of compensation for it. But you'd also think there would be a separation between the hotel and the Correspondents' Dinner. You'd think that part of the hotel would be cordoned off, or it'd have so much security surrounding it. No one in their right mind would want to go anywhere near it, let alone pull a gun out and try to assassinate the president. So on paper, security is pretty tight. It's heavy. Theoretically, every exit, every window, every door, manhole cover, air conditioning vent should be covered. And that is the first crack in the armour. Early that night, around 8 p.m. or so, the attacker is already inside the building. His name was Cole Thomas Allen, a 31-year-old from California. He didn't force his way into the hotel. He doesn't really need to because he's already a checked-in guest. He's staying in a room roughly 10 floors above the ballroom. He has time, privacy, and more importantly, he has a space to prepare for what he's going to try to do. So around 8:30 p.m, he sends a manifesto to his family. Minutes later, he leaves his room, not by the typical means of leaving the room. He leaves via a back stairwell. So he doesn't go through the monitored flow of foot traffic through the hotel. He slips out the back, effectively avoiding screening, and there's no checkpoints he has to pass through. But that still doesn't really add up to me, because you'd think an operation of this size, they would have agents outside, on the roofs, across the street, everywhere. Every angle should be covered theoretically. But surely you think there'd be a couple of agents in the stairwell or close to it, maybe a couple of them guarding the doors on each level, in the back alleys near the emergency fire exits. You think local security or police could do that job. From there, he moves downward through the building. He is carrying a 12-gauge shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives. And I don't know about you, but the choice of weapons he uses raises a couple of red flags with me. A 12-gauge shotgun to assassinate anybody. I mean, you have to get pretty fucking close to be able to use that. A handgun, I don't know if you're going to hit too much considering the layer of security and how many other people around you have handguns and automatic weapons. There was a heavily armed detachment of police that were first on stage wearing helmets, body armor, holding assault rifles. They look more like a special unit or a SWAT team than standard police officers on the beat. So taking a shotgun and a couple of handguns is probably not going to get you very far. And he also has a couple of knives on him. What was he going to try to do? Throw a knife at the president if the shotgun and handgun failed? It seems to me like he hasn't really thought this through, or he's just got whatever weapons he could get his hands on at the time, because apparently he did legally purchase the weapons. It just seems a little sus, and I will be using that word quite a lot on this episode, that this is what he turns up to what we can assume is the most heavily defended and guarded building in the city that night. So at approximately 8:35 to 8:36 p.m, the situation detonates. Alan reaches the main screening checkpoint near the ballroom. This is the point where the actual event security begins. So instead of stopping and going through the screening like the other guests, he runs through it. Witness accounts and law enforcement agree that he charges the checkpoint at speed. Security reacts instantaneously, but not before he breaches the space between the public hotel and the secured event. So there is a layer of security separating the functioning hotel and this event, as you'd think. I mean, I'd hope so. If I was the president, I'd hope that there was a checkpoint of some type, or three. So he makes his way downstairs from his room into the secured checkpoint, which I guess you had to have an ID tag or something, some type of identification to say that you're actually there. He's just charged through it, and now gunshots are heard. Some say one, some say multiple. Some accounts describe chaotic firing in different directions. A Secret Service agent is hit, but the bullet strikes his bulletproof vest, and he is taken to hospital with minor injuries and is later released. So at least one round is fired by the attacker. although that has become disputed in later analysis of the event. And this is the second red flag for me. In the vision, it doesn't look like the Secret Service agent is really paying attention. It kind of looks like he was on his phone or looking down. This guy makes his way through the checkpoint, sprints straight past this Secret Service agent, apparently shoots him in the chest or stomach area before continuing on his way, where he is stopped by security before he reaches the ballroom. My biggest question about this is, why wasn't Mr. Allen blown away? He should have been turned into Swiss cheese by this point. But then again, this is also the same Secret Service, well, probably a similar Secret Service, that let Thomas Crooks get a couple of shots off on a rooftop, hit the president, kill someone else at the Butler rally before they asked permission to take him out. From what I've heard, one of the snipers sees him, phones it in and asks permission to take him out. You should have just seen him and taken him out without even having to phone it in. I thought that was the whole point of having snipers on the roof, was to take down a threat before it became an even bigger threat. In this situation, this guy just sprints through. I don't think he was wearing any type of protective clothing or a bulletproof vest or anything. He runs through, he manages to shoot one of the guards, one of the Secret Service agents, before being tackled. Like, why wasn't he shot? On the video, you see agents pulling their weapons out. Why the fuck wasn't he taken out? I don't get it. Now, is the reason for this just because they were caught off guard by him running through the checkpoint so quickly? It looked like he was wearing a suit, so he kind of does blend in, because there's probably not too many people at the Correspondents' Dinner wearing t-shirts and shorts. It's a fancy event. So he probably wouldn't have drawn too many suspicions lining up. But at the same time, you have to have a pass, an identification tag of some type, to get past security into the actual event. So inside the ballroom, the reaction is immediate but very uneven. Some hear shots clearly, and if you've seen the video, you can hear what sounds like someone dropping something. Others hear confusion, shouting, movement, chairs scraping, people starting to panic. Secret Service agents don't hesitate. And within seconds, Trump is surrounded. Agents move him off the stage. Cabinet members are extracted. Guests dive under tables. Then the room collapses from ceremony into complete and utter chaos. Trump and J.D. Vance are evacuated. The attacker never manages to reach the ballroom. He is intercepted before he reaches the ballroom. He's tackled to the ground and taken into custody near the screening area after failing during the pursuit. There's no fatalities except for one injured officer, which effectively ends the event before it really begins. Yeah, and I guess it is a quite chaotic situation. No one was really prepared for it. But security, the Secret Service and police act much quicker than they have in the past. From the video, the moment you hear the shots, Secret Service agents are basically on the stage like Johnny on the spot. They grab Trump, surround him and take him off stage in a matter of seconds. Same with J.D. Vance and Melania. So I can't be too critical about the security response time. They seem to do their job pretty effectively, very quickly. The agent that got shot, as I mentioned before, doesn't look like he was paying too much attention. I think the biggest fault in the ring of security was there should have been more of it at the checkpoints. It seems like it was too laxed, it was too easy to get in, there wasn't enough checks. And this dude just comes up to the scanner, obviously runs through because he's got the guns on him, he's going to get pinged. But I can't imagine having a 12-gauge shotgun, depending on what size it is, fits that nicely under a suit. It's not like he was wearing a trench coat or anything. Multiple knives and handgun, that's easy enough to hide, but I think a shotgun would probably stick out a little bit. But that's easy to say in retrospect. So let's have a deeper look at the response. What worked and what didn't. What happens in those few seconds at the checkpoint tells you almost everything about the system. Because once Cole Thomas Allen makes his move, once he comes off that stairwell and hits the final screening point, the security system finally does what it's designed to do. It reacts fast. The United States Secret Service doesn't hesitate. Agents engage immediately. Commands are shouted. Weapons are drawn. And within a few seconds, the situation shifts from complete chaos to threat neutralized. The attacker doesn't reach the ballroom. He doesn't get eyes on the target. He is stopped at the line that matters most. At the same time, a second system activates in parallel. Protection. Donald Trump is surrounded and moved out, not gradually, decisively. This is drilled behavior. Routes are pre-planned. Roles are pre-assigned, and once the trigger point is hit, there's no confusion about what happens next. He is extracted quickly and is not harmed. Inside the room, even without full information, people are pushed back, moved, controlled. The chaos never really spills into mass panic. That doesn't come down to sheer luck either. It's trained containment. So at the point of reaction, the security system seems to work. It's fast, aggressive, and effective. Security stops Cole Thomas Allen from getting to his target, which is exactly what security is supposed to do. But this isn't the problem, what happened in those few seconds. It's everything that happened before them. Because Allen didn't crash through a perimeter from the outside, he moved through a building as a hotel guest. He was checked into the Washington Hotel. He managed to get guns through the hotel security. He used internal stairwells to bypass a controlled environment, which still staggers me. Doesn't seem to be any security in the stairwells. You'd think you would have an armed officer or 3 or 4. The most frightening part of this is he doesn't encounter any resistance until that final checkpoint. That's not a reaction failure, that's an access one. So as I outlined before, the response times, the fact that no one is hurt apart from the Secret Service agent, the threat is neutralized. They're all examples of where the system holds the line. The immediate armed response, the rapid identification of the threat, successful interception before target proximity, fast extraction of a protectee, and there's no mass casualty event. They're not small wins in security terms, they're the difference between incident and catastrophe. But the other side to that coin, this is where the system breaks down. The cracks are early, quieter, and more structural. The first one being the hotel problem. This isn't a sealed government building, it's a live hotel. There's hundreds, if not thousands of guests in this building while this correspondence dinner is taking place. And that means guests are coming and going as they please, rooms are private, internal movement is not fully controlled, and Allen exploits exactly this. He doesn't fight the security, he avoids it until the last possible moment. And in reality, what's Secret Service supposed to do? Knock on every door and do a search of the bedrooms, search people's private property? I don't know if that's illegal. On the other side of that, what does the hotel do? Does the hotel have its own internal security procedure when the correspondence dinner is going on, or there's a VIP guest? Do they have their own security that asks to, check things or whatever? You think they would be checking or scanning bags or something, or saying, hey, look, President's going to be here soon. Anyone who's checked in within a week to a couple of days of the President's visit who is staying in the room on that night needs to be checked. Maybe they do that, I don't know. It seems, a little laxed if there was no internal security from the hotel. And it doesn't seem like that is the case either, because these are exactly the points that Allen exploits. The second big problem is the perimeter illusion. There isn't just one perimeter, there are multiple. There's a public entry, the hotel entry, and the event screening. And the most important of these, the hard stop, is too close to the ballroom, and that is the event screening. By the time he's made it there, all these other aspects have already failed. The third issue, internal movement gaps. There's stairwells, corridors, service routes, we presume elevators as well. There are spaces that don't get the same scrutiny as the front of house security, and that's where Allen moves freely. Not through the front door, but in the blind spots in between the security system. I'll say it again, why wasn't there people or some type of security system, motion sensors or something like that in the stairwells and in the fire exits? It seems a little lackadaisical to me. The fourth, and maybe the most obvious issue, weapons presence inside the building. Now this is the hardest question. How do multiple weapons make it into the venue hosting a high-risk political event? Because once that happens, the entire security model changes. Security is no longer about keeping a threat out. It's about containing the threat that's already inside the building or already inside the security zone. And I think that is the biggest failure of this entire event. And maybe it's a logistics or a manpower problem, and maybe there wasn't enough agents, or maybe they just didn't think to check these areas. Now, I don't want to lay too much of the blame on the Secret Service, but you'd have to think someone would have thought, Well, a potential threat could come from one of these areas that isn't covered, stairwells, emergency exits, places like that, and no one really thinks to cover them. And this brings up the big question, could more have been done? The short answer to that is yes, but not in the way people think. You could flood the building with more personnel, but that doesn't really fix the structural gaps that are already in place. What would actually change the outcome would be securing entire floors, not just event spaces, doing a floor-by-floor securing and checking of guests and these access points, restricting or screening all hotel guests during high-risk events. That one I thought already happened, because you hear all these stories about the Secret Service. They go lock down a place 2 weeks before the president comes. They change out the kitchen staff and replace them with the White House chef team. All the food is checked and monitored before it comes in, so no one can put strychnine in the president's soup. Another obvious one is locking down and monitoring internal movement routes like stairwells, back exits, fire escapes, things like that, and expanding the hard perimeter further away from the ballroom. But that presents another series of problems. Those measures start turning a hotel into a controlled zone, which is expensive, disruptive, and politically complicated. So instead, the security accepts a level of risk, and most of the time that works until it doesn't. And I guess the Secret Service and the police thought they could control that risk well enough without needing more expensive, disruptive, or complicated security measures. I guess in hindsight, this building has had the Correspondents' Dinner every year. The Secret Service do know it inside and out, so they probably also have a little bit of a security bias. Because they have secured this building so many times in the past, they might have been thinking, we do this every year, we know it inside and out, we don't need to check the stairwells or exits because no one in their right mind is going to use them anyway. They might have been a bit overconfident in their security abilities. And this brings up the question, do they have enough personnel? In short, probably, but that's not where this failed. This wasn't a case of too few agents, a slow response time, or lack of firepower, because there was plenty of it. It was a case of the threat appearing inside the system faster than it could be filtered out. And that is a threat that can't be outnumbered with bodies or personnel alone. And this brings up a hard and conspiratorial question. Were one of these security apparatuses compromised? And I'm getting into conspiracy territory here. The short answer, there is no evidence that the United States Secret Service or any internal personnel were compromised or involved in the attempt. Nothing credible supports that. However, hypothetically and theoretically, could an agent have been compromised? Could the guy that got shot looking at his phone, was he a part of it? I'm not saying he is, I'm just saying from a conspiratorial angle, that would be one explanation how this guy managed to get through this ring of security so easily. But we also have to ignore everything we've just looked at, like lack of internal checks, blind spots, stairwells, things like that. On the other hand, a few critical questions that we can ask. Were warning signs missed? Were security assumptions outdated? Did planners underestimate internal threat pathways? Was the focus too heavily placed on external attack scenarios? Because systems don't need to be compromised in order to fail. They just need to be designed around the wrong type of threat model. When we look at this from a 1,000-foot view, security worked exactly where it was strongest, and it failed everywhere it assumed it didn't need to be. And I think that is the main takeaway from this. Security works where it was strongest in the ring of security around the ballroom, the quick response times, the firepower, and the personnel. But the other side of that coin, it failed everywhere it assumed it didn't need to be, such as stairwells, blind spots, checking patrons, alleyways, and looking into internal threats. Part 2. The question that sits inside that timeline. Mr. Allen didn't break into the system. He started inside it. And what do we know about Mr. Allen and his movements before the assassination attempt? We know he travelled across the country. He checked into the same hotel the Correspondents' Ball was being held. He assembled weapons inside the building, moved through internal pathways, and only met resistance at the final checkpoint. And that's not a single layered failure. That is a layered access problem. And we'll come to Mr. Allen in a bit more detail later on, because I have a few questions about Mr. Allen, his background, and his motivations. One of the biggest factors in the security assumption and its consequent failing is the building itself. The Washington Hilton is not just a venue. It's a known presidential security site that has a long history of holding the Correspondents' Dinner. But it also has a violent past. March 30, 1981, the Ronald Reagan shooting. Outside this exact hotel, after speaking at an event, Ronald Reagan exits through a side entrance. A man named John Hinckley Jr. is waiting. The distance between Hinckley and Reagan is just a few meters. Within a few seconds, Hinckley fires off 6 shots. Press Secretary James Brady is shot in the head. A police officer is hit. A Secret Service agent is hit. Reagan is struck in the chest by a ricochet, which he didn't realise at first. He's pushed into a limousine, coughing up blood as the bullet collapses his lung. He survives, but barely. That moment alone reshapes modern Secret Service protocol. Since then, the Secret Service has implemented tighter perimeters, controlled exits, and layered screening. And yet, 45 years later, inside the same exact building, another armed man gets within striking distance of a sitting president. Which brings us to the gunman. His name, Cole Thomas Allen, age 31, originally from California. Mr. Allen is an educated man. He's reported to have an engineering and computer science background. He travels across country by train a few days before the attack and checks into the hotel ahead of time, which obviously wasn't random coincidence and was part of his bigger plan. When I first saw a picture of Cole Thomas Allen, he didn't look like the typical wannabe assassin. He looked pretty clean cut. He looked like a relatively intelligent guy. And this is another red flag for me. He doesn't exactly fit the mold of the lone shooter. Thomas Crooks in the Butler shooting, kind of looks like the type of guy that would try to assassinate a president. The biggest problem with these figures is when you really start to look into them, they look less like assassins and more like patsies. And I don't think Cole Thomas Allen is any different. I think he's definitely a patsy, but a patsy for who? And I'll get into that a little later. So what do we know about Mr. Allen's motives? He sent a manifesto minutes before the attack. He expressed anger towards government and administration figures, which is probably self-evident because he was at the same hotel that these same administration figures were attending, and he was trying to carry out an act of violence against them. He indicated intent to target officials. He also referenced security weaknesses directly. One line reportedly captured the tone, questioning why there was no damn security, which is not ideology, it's observation. Isn't it also strange how all these attempted assassins and assassins all have 3 names? Thomas Crooks had a middle name, I can't remember what it was. I think Tyler Robinson has a middle name, Lee Harvey Oswald, John Wilkes Booth, and now Cole Allen Thomas. I have a lot of questions about Cole Thomas Allen. I think there needs to be more questions asked about who this guy was, his background, his motivations, and where does he come from. Because he seemingly just kind of springs out of the blue with this manifesto. He hates the president, he hates the administration, apparently he also doesn't like Christians, and he tries to shoot up the Correspondents' Dinner. So who the fuck is this guy? Where does he come from? I have a few questions about Cole Thomas Allen, one of which is, how does someone bring multiple weapons into a hotel hosting a presidential event and not a single question is asked? He apparently wasn't searched, his person wasn't searched, his bags weren't searched. He just brings guns into a hotel. And that is also very reminiscent of the Las Vegas shooting where that guy brought like 2 bags of guns into the hotel. He used the service elevator apparently to do so, and not a question was asked then either. And apparently those guns were in like big military style duffel bags. They were heavy, kind of obvious he wasn't just carrying shoes and clothes. And why would a guy like that needs 2 huge bags that need to be taken up on a cart or something to a hotel room? And then look what happened with that. He starts shooting into the crowd at a country music festival, and it's one of the biggest mass shootings in US history. Fortunately, the Correspondents' Dinner doesn't turn out that way, but it could have. If this guy had more access to firearms, if he had bags of guns, this could have turned into a very chaotic situation very quickly. But having said that, there's a lot more security at the Correspondents' Ball than there was in Vegas. He would have been blown away by the Secret Service pretty quickly, or the cops. There were much tighter security protocols to go through. But he does exploit them. And this brings up a very relevant question. Why are hotel guest areas not fully secured during high-risk gatherings? If the president and the whole administration being in the same place at the same time isn't a high-risk gathering, I don't know what is. And what do you have to do in order to fully secure an area? Did the security services just assume that a threat would come from outside and not inside? And that's why they didn't bother covering these areas? And this brings up another very relevant question. How long was he moving through the building before he was detected? He could have been in there for hours. He could have been sitting in the stairwell for an hour before the event. There's a lot of unanswered questions around this. Why do early reports disagree on whether he actually fired a weapon? Some reports say he did, others say he didn't. So which one is it? Should be pretty easy to tell. Secret Service agent was hit, so we can probably assume that he at least fired one shot. Which leads to another question, why was an agent hit if interception was immediate? Now, why did he try to shoot this guy and not just run past him? Was it an accidental firing? Why does he just shoot this agent? And this kind of makes me think, and I'll put my tinfoil hat on, was it to make it look more serious than it actually was? Did he have to injure somebody to make it more of a credible assassination attempt? And this brings up the overarching question. Was this a failure of planning, coordination, or was it complacency on the part of the security agencies? Or was it a combination of all three? Now we come down to my favourite part of the show, Tank's conspiracies. If you're conspiratorial, like myself, you will have probably seen the same news footage as I have, and most likely come to a similar conclusion, that the assassination attempt at the White House Correspondents Dinner isn't quite what it looks like. If we look back at everything Donald Trump has done over the last year or so, especially since the start of the year, do we really care that someone tried to take him out again? I think it was bound to happen. I'm not saying I support it in any way. I'm just saying, is it a surprise that someone has tried to assassinate him again? It probably won't be the last time either. Look at the fucking pain and suffering he has caused on a global scale. Unlike other presidents in his position, he has started a war with a country that he cannot win. If you can hear something in the background, it has just begun pouring with rain. It's raining kind of heavily at the moment, so I do apologise for any background noise. At the time of recording, it's the 6th of May 2026. While I was watching the news this morning, the White House had officially called an end to the Iran war, which is probably the smartest thing they have done in a very long time. Now, apparently, Marco Rubio was explaining what was happening, so take it with a very large grain of salt, because I don't think even he knew what he was talking about, because he couldn't really put a coherent sentence together. He said they're pulling out of the area. In other words, Trump has taken his toys and going home. It's a little clear what Mr. Rubio was actually fucking talking about. The details are a bit sketchy, because it sounds like Trump has maybe finally realised he's in a lose-lose situation despite his arrogant chest-beating rhetoric about destroying Iran and wiping out a civilization overnight and all that fucking gun-ho bullshit he's been going on about. It's not just him, Hegseth is the same. We're loitering over the airspace and we're going to take out target after target. Now, I don't think anyone with half a brain really believes the US government's claims that they had the upper hand in the war and that they've, quote-unquote, beaten and wiped out the army. Because what Rubio was saying is that they're pretty much taking all the military assets and backing off out of the area, and things aren't going to change. They're still going to, I guess, blockade the strait, or they're going to escort ships through, which is probably going to lead to more spikes in the fuel price, which is exactly what we need, because the world is probably going to go into a recession because of Trump and the fuckheads in Washington. Could even lead to a depression and probably a famine too if fertilizer doesn't get through, crops don't get sown and they don't get grown, and we're probably all going to starve. Probably not so much the first world, but the third world is probably in for a rough couple of years. And I don't think the knock-on effects have been fully felt with this war, and I don't believe this ceasefire is going to hold, or that they're just going to pack up and go. They moved all that military hardware and all this personnel into the area, and now they're turning around and going home. Because something is happening behind the scenes that I don't think a lot of people really have taken into account. There is a far bigger agenda than just the directives of Operation Fury, a regime change or whatever the fucking excuse the White House gave. But I don't think the ceasefire is going to hold. Something's going to happen. There'll be an attack on an American ship or something like that, and they'll blame Iran, and then they'll be at war again. The price of petrol will go through the roof, which I think it will, because it doesn't sound like the straits are open, and it doesn't sound like Iran is going to not charge ships a toll through the waters for safe passage. But anyway, that's getting a bit off topic. Back to conspiracies around Cole Thomas Allen. If you've seen the same footage on the news as I have, Cole Thomas Allen doesn't exactly look like the typical would-be assassin. He looks too clean-cut, and there's something about what the series of events that happened that just seem so, what's the word I'm looking for? Staged. It looks like an absolute crock of shit. And I don't think the timing is coincidence either. This is happening in an election cycle environment. It's also happening in a politically polarized country. The US is more divided than it ever has been. What better way to draw people's attention away from the clusterfuck in Iran and Venezuela that everyone's forgotten about and all the other bullshit that's happened in 2026? What better way to distract the public than to have another assassination attempt? And while there is no verified evidence that it was staged, this is only my personal opinion. Look, and I'm not even saying that it was 100% staged or it wasn't staged. It looks more staged to me than it doesn't. It happens at a time of increasing geopolitical instability. You factor the Epstein files in and all the personal bullshit around Trump and what people have been saying about him. Is he losing his mind? Is he the Antichrist? He has pissed a lot of people off. Is that reason enough that some lone wolf decided to try and assassinate him again? Or is there something bigger happening? Because I don't believe anything is coincidence. I never really have. I don't think it's coincidence that there are oil refinery fires all over the world during a fuel crisis. I don't think that's coincidence. I'll definitely be covering that on a future episode. I don't think it's a coincidence that Trump attacked Venezuela, had a regime change, then attacks Iran. I don't think that's a coincidence. These are the two largest oil-producing countries in the world that don't have any connection to the US or don't want to share their oil with the US. Trump wants the oil, so does his investor cronies. Oil companies made billions of dollars because of the increase in price. The world's destabilized. He wants to bring his tariffs in. He's trying to make America great again by crippling the entire planet. But realistically, it's not viable. I don't think it's a coincidence that he keeps telling people to forget about the Epstein files. The Epstein files get released, makes him look pretty bad. Then all of a sudden there's this big distraction in the form of the Iran war, and now another distraction with an attempted assassination attempt. So I think we are definitely being fed bullshit because everything is connected and nothing is coincidence. And while there might be no verified evidence that this was staged, events like this don't just happen in isolation. They get absorbed into political narratives. Before I go too deep into the rabbit hole, let's have a critical look at was this staged or was this not staged. So the assassination attempt happens in an election cycle environment in a politically polarized country. The US is more divided than it ever has been during ongoing geopolitical tension, including conflict, discussions around Iran. It also comes right after Venezuela, the Epstein files, the UFO files, and all that other bullshit. Seems every couple of weeks, it's not even every couple of weeks, it's every week there is some global event. The price of oil's gone through the roof. Oil refineries have mysteriously caught fire all over the world. If you look back through history, events like this always seem to happen when the world is geopolitically sensitive or there's an outbreak of a war or a conflict or something like that. Is it just part of the great cycle of things? So there is no verified evidence that this was staged. But what is real? Events like this don't just happen in isolation. They do get absorbed into political narratives almost instantaneously. And if we look at Iran and the political climate around that, there's ongoing concern over escalation in Iran. And the war in Iran has really divided America, and it's divided Americans, it's divided the world. I think people are starting to wake up to who really runs the world, who's really pulling the strings. None of it's justified, none of it seems right. There are many agendas at play behind the scenes. The Warhawks want a war with Iran for numerous reasons. The one I keep coming back to is oil. And so far, for a president that has said he's anti-war, he's got a very funny way of showing it. He's attacked Venezuela. They have a lot of oil, and now Iran has a lot of oil. And now Iran gets attacked. They also have a lot of oil. So what country is next on the US hit list? Look, I said it before, I love Americans. A lot of my audience is from the US. I don't have any problem with Americans. I have a problem with the US government and the way it does things and the way it treats other countries. And what's happening in Iran is another example of that. And yes, the Iranian regime have done a lot of bad shit to their own people, but it's, for the most part, it's contained to its own people. I'm not saying that makes it right, because it's not. They shouldn't treat anyone like that. And going back to my original point, it is funny watching people waking up and seeing the world for what it is, one giant fucking stage. And that brings up the question, was the assassination attempt at the Correspondents' Dinner another staged event to try to buy sympathy for the president? We all know his numbers went up after he was shot in Butler. He was more popular than ever. Is this another way to boost his numbers in a time where he is losing support by the day? I think his polling numbers are the lowest they've ever been, and he's losing ground in Republican states that have typically always backed anything that he has done. Is Trump the type of guy that would stage an event like this? Yes, I think he would. I think he's so narcissistic and so unhinged at the moment, so drunk on power, he would probably do, I wouldn't say anything, I think he does have some morals. He does have some restraint, but I could definitely see him trying to manufacture an assassination attempt in order to try to buy back support for his failing administration. Now, you might completely disagree with me on that, and that's fine. That's just how I see things. Let's put our tinfoil hats on and have a look at some of the conspiracies. So was this staged and why? I think the most obvious would be the upcoming midterm election. I think he's probably going to get massacred. He's lost a lot of support, and I don't think he'll survive the midterms. So this is a good way to try to get back some support, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this morning Marco Rubio has come out and said they're ceasing operations in Iran, but things are going to stay the same, but there's not going to be any more military build-up. They're moving their forces out of the area, or more or less out of Iranian missile range. Now, whether the military experts have finally gotten through to Trump, and maybe he's finally starting to listen to his advisors rather than just fire them en masse, who knows? But it definitely seems like a very drastic change. And this change is from the same administration that has been saying for weeks, we're going to wipe out an entire civilization, we're going to destroy your power plants and target your civilian infrastructure and commit war crimes, we're going to blow up every piece of military equipment in the land, we'll blow up Craigie Island, whatever the fuck it's called. That's very different rhetoric to what we've been hearing for the past, 8 weeks or so. So why has this changed all of a sudden? Is it to do with the upcoming midterms? Is it because, 61% of Americans don't agree with it? Is that a reason to stage an attack like this, to make people care about Trump again? But that brings up the question, why should we care about Trump? He has failed, he has gone back on his promises. He's not the same Trump from a couple of years ago. He seems to be more demented, a bit more manic. Is he just drunk on power? Who the fuck knows? Is he the Antichrist? There's a strong argument for that as well. And if we look at the circus of American politics, distraction has always been used as a tool to take the attention off of some controversial topic and get the public to look in a different direction. It's all part of the circus and the theatrics. But at the same time, is there a deeper agenda to this? Kennedy was assassinated because he didn't want to back the Vietnam War. He wanted to control the CIA, and then he gets a bullet in the head. Now, I'm not saying this will happen or it should happen. I'm saying this hypothetically. Could Trump be facing other attempts in the future for, I'll say pausing, just to be conservative, the Iran war? I don't think it's really worked out quite as he planned it. It's also costing billions. I think it's over $200 billion it's cost so far, which must signal to the American people that we have money for bombs and destroying another Middle Eastern country, but we don't have any spare cash laying around for Americans that actually need it. And look, the Australian government does exactly the same thing. It does not give two fucks about its people. The Prime Minister was very proud of himself that he secured 100 million litres of fuel. He burned 25,000 litres going to these different countries in Asia to try to secure the fuel supply, and comes back with 100 million liters, which is equal to a day's worth of fuel. And unfortunately, the United States has a long history of political violence and presidential assassination. And another assassination would equal another distraction. But a distraction from what? The midterms, the Iran war, the Epstein files, the UFO files, the Diddy files, Venezuela, who the fuck knows? The political climate changes so quickly now, it's hard to keep up. There's always something happening. Was someone pulling the president's strings? I think the assassination attempt could potentially be a distraction to buy back sympathy for Trump or some type of credibility. The other thing I've wondered is, why was the would-be assassin taken alive? They're usually killed in this type of situation, especially being so close to Secret Service, but he is taken alive. Almost like he was expecting to be. The look on Cole Thomas Allen's face was not one of shock or surprise. He looked very placid, like this was part of the plan. It looked like he had the clothes stripped off of him pretty quickly because he had like a foil blanket covering him, which is different to how you see him in the blue suit running through the hallway. Maybe they're checking for bombs or weapons, obviously. But the look on his face did seem to indicate he knew it was coming. Because why wasn't he blown away? Why wasn't he turned into Swiss cheese? He runs past all these guards. They're all heavily armed, and he gets tackled. And if we know anything about security breaches, especially around presidents and VIPs, usually the security forces, namely the police and Secret Service, shoot first and ask questions later. So I'm really surprised that he wasn't killed. I mean, who's to say he remains that way? Tyler Robinson handed himself in. He hasn't been killed in jail yet that we know of. John Wilkes Booth was killed or killed himself not too long afterwards. Lee Harvey Oswald was shot by Jack Ruby. These assassins usually end up one way, and it's just, I do find it interesting that he is taken alive so easily. I think if he was really serious, he would have had an automatic weapon or some type of semi-automatic weapon or a rifle or something, because really a fucking shotgun, handgun, and a couple of knives is not going to do a lot. That's another big factor in all this as well, is the weapons. To make it look realistic, he would have needed guns, obviously, but he's picked probably the least dangerous type of weapons to try to assassinate a president. It's like Thomas Crook's trying to assassinate the president with the iron sights instead of a scope. Now, what assassin in history hasn't used a scope? You might only get one shot at your target. You don't want to miss it, and he's up there shooting with the iron sights. Tyler Robinson allegedly disassembled a very large rifle, put it in his backpack, made it off the roof in under a minute, then dumped it in the nearby woods or something like that. Now, whoever's pulling the strings should probably come up with a better backstory and a better set of circumstances if they want people to believe this type of bullshit in the future. I mean, how many times can we have the fucking lone gunman story? It's been done to fucking death. There's always a crazy lone gunman with an agenda and a manifesto. And he just so happens to tell us his plan. He's telling us he wants to shoot the president and yada, yada, yada. And he doesn't like Christians. He doesn't like Democrats. He doesn't like Republicans. It's the same fucking playbook. It's the same story with different characters. Whoever it is, whether it be the CIA, the shadow government, the fucking swamp people, they need to come up with a better story. Because this one's not believable anymore. It's so cliche at this point. I don't think anyone really believes that Tyler Robinson killed Charlie Kirk, that this wasn't somehow staged or put on, because it's just like the most unlikely set of circumstances and the most unlikely culprit. And we're meant to believe he was just going to like check in with his guns, make his way down the stairs, get to the last layer of security, bum rush the guards at the metal detector and charge up the fucking corridor in an attempt to get close enough to the president with a shotgun, a handgun, and 2 knives, an attempt to assassinate him and other presidential figures. It just seems a little fucking sus to me. It seems so unlikely to succeed that it was always going to fail, and that makes me think that it was meant to fail. It was meant to be a stunt. Trump didn't look too shocked by it either, but I guess after it's happened enough times, he's probably not that shocked anymore. Or maybe that's just his surprise face and he didn't really see it coming, and it all happened too quick for him to really react. Maybe it was a way of distracting the president. Maybe the Secret Service is saying, hey, we've got your back, don't worry. We know how to do our jobs. We're not compromised. Maybe this was just a stunt to get the president comfortable again. And maybe the real attack is coming sometime in the future. I'm not saying that it is Secret Service, so don't come and investigate me. I'm saying this hypothetically. It just seems a little sus to me. And given the long track record of assassinations and assassination attempts in the US, it's also not out of the blue either. Unfortunately, this type of stuff, I think, has become all too common in US politics. And once again, the suspect doesn't really fit the mold, but at the same time, he kind of does, because Thomas Crooks looks like a fucking nerd, and he apparently tried to shoot Trump. Not that any of us would know, because no one really saw the pictures of him. The same with Tyler Robinson. I don't believe that image of him in the hallway with the dark glasses on was him. It just doesn't make sense. He couldn't have gotten there that quick. Not after disassembling that rifle. But anyway, so let's have a deeper look at Cole Thomas Allen. Now, according to Reuters, Cole Thomas Allen came from Los Angeles. He's a Caltech graduate who worked as a part-time teacher and game developer. He's approximately 31 years of age, living in Torrance, California, a coastal town that is in part of the South Bay area adjacent to LA and Santa Monica. According to Facebook postings, he was named Teacher of the Month in December 2024 by the Torrance Office of C2 Education, a nationwide private test preparation and tutoring service for college-bound students. His LinkedIn profile describes him as a mechanical engineer and computer scientist by degree, an independent game developer by experience, and teacher by birth. So he's obviously a pretty clever guy. He's not some dumb fuck fringe dweller. He obtained a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Caltech in 2017 and a master's degree of computer science in California State University in 2025. He worked for the past several years as a part-time teacher for C2 Education and as a self-employed game developer. So he seems pretty normal. There's not a lot of red flags in his background. It's not like he attended extremist meetings or anything or whatever. He's not reading any banned materials or anything like that. He seems like a pretty normal guy. So this is from theguardian.com. Prosecutors release selfies of alleged White House dinner shooter at hotel. You can find these in the show notes if you want to see these pictures. There's a picture of him wearing a blue suit and a red tie. And it looks like he's got a sawn-off shotgun or something under his arm. Besides what looks like a shotgun, no, it actually might be a knife. He might have a knife tucked into his belt. Besides the knife or gun, whatever it is, he looks pretty normal. I mean, if I saw this guy coming towards me on the street, I wouldn't think too much of it. He doesn't exactly look like a highly trained assassin. Federal prosecutors provided in a filing on Wednesday the most dedicated account to date of Cole Thomas Allen's alleged weeks-long plan to kill Donald Trump, who had joined more than 2,500 members of the Washington Press Corps for their annual White House Correspondents Dinner. The motion aimed at keeping Allen detained and filed by the U.S. Attorney for D.C., Janine Poro, includes two selfies of the alleged shooter standing in front of a mirror in his hotel room in a black suit, a slight smirk. He is kitted out with two firearms and multiple knives tucked into his belt. Okay, that was a knife. Prosecutors alleged they are the same weapons that were confiscated from Allen after the attack. Prosecutors have asked the court to detain Allen before his trial because they say evidence of his guilt is, quote, overwhelming. The filing states that he faces a possible sentence of life in prison and a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. Allen has yet to enter a plea in his case. Also very interesting. Why hasn't he? A Secret Service agent that stopped Allen at about 8:40 on Saturday night. The court records assert one officer was shot during an exchange of fire but was uninjured due to the bulletproof vest. Surveillance footage reviewed by the Washington Post shows a Secret Service officer drawing his weapon within 2 seconds of Allen's arrival. At the checkpoint, the officer is seen firing 4 times, including in the direction of other security personnel as Allen is rushing past. Yeah, he could have killed or hit other security personnel, as it just outlined. But at the same time, he had a pretty clear shot as he ran past. I know it happens very quickly, but these guys are obviously pretty highly trained with firearms. They could probably hit what they're aiming for. Cole Thomas Allen gets to the checkpoint, and within 2 seconds, the guard's pulling his gun out. He runs past and he fires shots at him. I don't think he could have gotten that far on foot. By the time he's pulled his gun out and fired the 4 shots, he should have gotten hit. And the Secret Service obviously have the go-ahead to use firearms in public spaces. Now, whether he didn't shoot more was because he was in danger of hitting patrons or other security personnel, I don't know, I can only speculate. But at the same time, I don't think he would have missed. According to the Washington Post review, there is no indication in the footage that Allen ever fired his weapon. Yeah, interesting. So if he doesn't fire his weapon, who the fuck shot the Secret Service officer? Did he accidentally shoot himself while he pulled his gun out? And that is interesting. There's no indication in the footage that Allen ever fired his weapon, though Wednesday's motion alleges a US Secret Service officer saw him discharge it. So the eyewitness accounts aren't lining up. What was captured on video doesn't really align with what the agents say happened. And will that be reviewed in the trial? Will they examine the bullet that hit the Secret Service officer and match it to his gun? Because that should be pretty easy, I think. I'm assuming they would have recovered the bullet pretty easily. It would have been still in the vest. I'm assuming that's how a proper investigation would go. And going back to JFK, there was a lot of cover-up when he had gotten shot. They overruled the Dallas coroner, and apparently the coroner in Dallas has the final say. They had to do an autopsy before a body can be released, and they wanted the body released that night, and it takes usually a couple of weeks or a week or so. A set of allegedly pre-scheduled emails sent minutes before the attack offer unusual insight into the motivations behind what is alleged to be Allen's botch attempt on Trump's life. Quote, "I am no longer willing to permit a pedophile, rapist, and traitor to coat my hands with his crimes." Interesting. He is said to have written before proceeding to outline a set of rules to follow during the attack. The filing includes a description of a, quote, postscript letter apparently written from Allen's hotel room in Washington. In it, the author describes the hotel's weak security protocols, interesting, and a reflection that no one at the hotel seemed to consider him a threat. By that admission, the hotel really didn't check his bags or really check him at all by the sound of it, if he was no threat. So maybe they're only targeting people who they think are threats. He signed his final letter, Cold Force, Friendly Federal Assassin Allen. Interesting. The alias Cold Force may have been a nod to Allen's various internet and gaming pursuits outside of his time as a school tutor. He frequently operated under the pseudonyms Cold Force and at C-Force 3000 on forums like X, YouTube, and Twitch. On Steam, a popular gaming forum, Allen's full name was linked to the curator profile Iceforged Games. Since Trump's second election, Allen's posts began to veer from gaming chatter to more pointed political commentary. Archived tweets, first reported by CNN, compared Trump to Adolf Hitler and encouraged others critical of his presidency to purchase guns. He also advocated to nullify the 2024 election results. Allen first purchased a firearm linked to the Washington attack in October 2023. He purchased a 12-gauge shotgun 2 years later in August 2025, according to firearm records detailed in court findings. Interesting. Spot the red flags in that. So is it a completely staged event, or is he just an unhinged leftist with an agenda? After reading that, things become a bit more harder to determine. I still think it was set up to buy sympathy, but at the same time, does anyone really care anymore about Trump? He bombed a girls' school in Iran and killed like 180 schoolgirls, which is a war crime. Why the fuck should I care that some computer game developer and tutor tried to assassinate him at the White House Correspondents Ball? I mean, it's all relative in the end. And just like the long history of political assassin suspects, something doesn't add up. And I don't think there's a piece of this puzzle that adds up with Cole Thomas Allen. Something just doesn't make sense with him. He's sending off emails just before he leaves his hotel room. He writes a letter that is found later on. He sends a manifesto, and with all the generic Trump-hating points in it, but it just seems a little generic and flat to me. There's a lot to this story that doesn't make sense. And if you can think of a conspiracy angle that I've missed, definitely leave a comment on Facebook or Instagram, preferably Instagram. I would love to hear them. When we look back at it, he didn't break into the system. He moved through it step by step until the only thing left between him and the target was the final line of defense. And fortunately, that final line of defense did its job. I still think there's a lot of things that don't make sense about this series of events that followed. And the question isn't just how he got that far, it's why the system allowed him to get that far in the first place. And that wraps up the Trump assassination attempt, the White House Correspondents Dinner. Before we end the show, there was another shooting involving the presidency. This happened 2 days ago at time of recording on May the 4th, 2026. There was a shooting near the White House complex in Washington, D.C. It hasn't made the news here in Australia. I first heard about it through YouTube. I don't know too much about it, but I thought it was interesting that there's been 2 shootings this close together involving the presidency. So let's have a quick look at what happened at the White House Secret Service shooting. On May the 4th, 2026, around 3:30 p.m, a shooting occurred near the White House complex in Washington, D.C., close to the Washington Monument and National Mall area. According to multiple confirmed reports, Secret Service agents identified a suspicious armed individual. The suspect was seen carrying what appeared to be a firearm. Agents and uniformed officers moved in to intercept. The suspect fled on foot. During the pursuit, the suspect drew and fired a weapon at officers. Secret Service agents returned fire and shot the suspect. Now, this shooting didn't occur in the grounds of the White House. It was close by in the National Mall near the Washington Monument, but it's still within the surrounding high-security federal zone. So who was involved? The suspect is an unidentified adult male. According to early reporting, a firearm was recovered at the scene. He was shot by Secret Service and then hospitalised. So I don't think he was killed either, by the sound of it. Like I said, I haven't heard anything about this. There's been absolutely no news about it. I only heard about it a day after it occurred. A juvenile bystander was also struck and injured with non-life-threatening injuries. Secret Service response. So how did the Secret Service deal with this threat? Plainclothes agents first spotted the suspect. They observed what appeared to be a concealed firearm. Before uniformed officers moved in, the suspect attempted to flee, then opened fire. Agents returned fire immediately. The suspect was struck and taken down. The area was locked down temporarily. White House went into a brief protective lockdown procedure. Journalists were moved inside for safety. Now, at the time, Donald Trump was inside the White House complex attending a scheduled business-related event and was not directly exposed to the threat. No breach of the White House grounds occurred. One suspect was hospitalised, status unclear at this time. One juvenile bystander injured, and no Secret Service or police fatalities reported. You can make the deduction and say people are really not happy with Donald Trump, or maybe there's now this acceptable mentality in the US that if you don't like the president, it's up to you to do something about it. And that was something I heard briefly when Cole Allen Thomas was identified. He had this similar mindset that all these assassins and mass shooters have. It's up to them to do something about the perceived problem. They look at someone like Trump or Biden or whoever it happens to be. They have a problem with the way they do things and don't see anything being done about them from an existential point of view. So it's up to them to basically become the hero of their own story and take the law into their own hands, because they're the only ones that are willing and capable to do something about this perceived threat that they have conjured into existence in their mind. Whether you love or hate Trump is not really the point. The point is you can't have people taking the law into their own hands. I don't agree with what Trump did in Iran. I don't agree with the school being bombed or in the clusterfuck of the Iran war and plunging the world into a fuel crisis, which will probably lead to a recession and cost millions of lives in several years' time when there's not enough food to go around because no fertilizer could make it through the straits. Now, I don't agree with that, but I don't think people should arm themselves and try to assassinate a president because they don't like them. That also goes against the structured norm of a civilized world. Because this type of shit happens all the time in countries like Africa and third world countries. Regimes change overnight. Leaders are taken out. Look what's happening in Mali that no one's talking about, and other places in Africa. I can't remember if it's Mali or somewhere like that, but the government was overthrown by the military, and this jihadist group is trying to set up a Islamic caliphate in Africa. No one's talking about it. But that type of thing is common not common, but it does happen more than the developed world. Now, we might see that on the news and go, well, yeah, it's Africa, that's kind of expected. The US is a different story. It shouldn't be accepted in a civilized first world nation, but more and more, this type of thing is happening in the US. People are taking the law into their own hands, wandering around with guns, because they believe they're the only one that can bring about change, which I think is just delusional behavior and thinking. This incident is not a White House breach. It is a perimeter zone armed confrontation, meaning a threat was identified before reaching the White House. Engagement happened in the surrounding federal security layer. The outcome was determined by rapid interception rather than prevention of entry. I think they probably upped their game since Butler and the Correspondents Dinner. I'm not saying they didn't do a great job in the Correspondents Dinner, but I think the Secret Service are definitely on their toes now. It'd be a pretty busy time for a Secret Service agent, I'd imagine. But this event, more than anything else, does prove that the system works, but only after the threat had already entered the operational zone. And this links back to what we saw in the Correspondents Dinner, layered security, detection versus prevention, and how fast escalation actually happens in Washington incidents. It'd be interesting to see how that story unfolds too, because there isn't much known about it at the moment. So even though those two incidents aren't connected, I think it highlights a broader pattern of, I don't even know if it's an increase in security breaches, because I'm not sure if that's statistically a normal number of breaches or not. But it does show these breaches do happen, and they're happening probably more frequently than they did a few years ago. It also shows that despite the assumptions and flaws in the Secret Service and the security apparatuses around Washington, they do still work. So while that doesn't directly tie back to the Washington Correspondents Dinner assassination attempt, it is interesting to look at as part of a pattern around security breaches around the White House and the president, and just how those threats are dealt with. And that brings us to the end of the episode. I hope you all enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. You can hit the link in the description and head on over to the Truth Tank shop on Spring. Pick yourself up some merch. You'll be supporting the show and look really cool doing it. If merch isn't your thing, you can head on over to Buy Me a Coffee and buy me a coffee, or in this case, buy me some tank fuel. You can make a one-off donation of your choosing or a recurring monthly payment. Every bit helps and keeps the tank running in my quest for truth and justice. Mainly just truth. You can download and listen to your favorite episodes of the Truth Tank on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Castbox, Audible, Amazon Music, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread it around and get the Truth Tank out there. You can leave a 5-star rating and review on your preferred podcast player, or all of them. Each review helps the show grow and get found, and I'll be back in the next week or two with a brand new episode. Next episode is a milestone episode. It's episode 100, so definitely stick around for that. But until then, I'm a Tank. This is the truth. Truth to tell.